there was a point in my life where every couple of nights I'd walk to my balcony at around 11 p.m. after everyone had gone to sleep in my house, and I would slowly peer over the edge onto the concrete pavement, and I would ask myself a question. I'm 13 floors up. Would I feel it if I jumped right now? At that point in time, I would spend my days going between two places that I hated to live in, two places that I absolutely did not want to be in, and that was school and home. These two fiery pits of hell, these two places where I felt like I was the hot potato jumping between these two locations. I hated school because of the constant reminder that I wasn't good enough, that I was helpless, that I was done for, that I had no future. And then I'd come back home and I would find out that I am an alien within the place that I am told that I belong. I felt like I didn't relate to anyone in my family. I felt like no one in my family had a space for me. I had painted my mother, and for context, this is my second mother that I'm talking about. My first mother had passed away a year before my parents got married. I had painted her as the villain of my story. I had painted, well, I hadn't really painted my father. My father had become an unknown. He had become what I felt like was brainwashed by my mother, the villain, and I had felt like he had become unreliable. My father was a pillar to me for the year that he stayed a single parent taking care of me and my little sister. But what I felt was that after getting married again, he had moved. The pillar had moved within the architecture of my life. The pillar was shifting within the structure that I wanted to remain so stable, and it created a disbalance, and it was so close to have I was so close to have it all crumble down. And aside from my parents, I still have two beautiful siblings who at that time had become a weakness to me. They had become a liability. They Just the fact that they existed meant that I would be made the second, even third priority within the house. I would be kind of left to my own. I would just be allowed to do whatever as long as it didn't disrupt the integrity of the rest of the family. But what was interesting that even though I call them a weakness, they were also my greatest strength. They were just the fact that they existed not only made them a liability, but they also were these they were this orb of light that was kind of pulling me towards it, telling me that my job was not done, that I have a responsibility, I have a duty, I have a true masculine purpose, and that is to serve. But before I elaborate on that, I'd like to talk about what depression is in an evolutionary context, so we can sit down and kind of break it down. First thing I want to make clear is that as much as you think depression is a clinical illness, something that exists solely within the brain, it cannot be changed. You must simply accept it for what it is. You must simply ruminate, marinate in your depression. That is not true. The existence of depression from an evolutionary context exists in order to create change. This is especially relevant in the context of masculine people. I'm not referring to men specifically, but I'm referring to um, people with more prominent masculine energies, right? People who have this psychic pain, and this psychic pain occurs at at every level. It occurs to everyone regardless of wherever you are in life. And this psychic pain, let me zoom out a little. And this psychic pain, what it leads to is that it leads to rumination. If you notice, if you've been depressed earlier in your life, if you are today, you will have noticed that you probably spend a lot of time just sitting and thinking about things. And that's part of what depression's role is. It's part of what it does. And that's part of the reason why it's so important, is because in this rumination will lead to change. And that change will lead to a higher rate of survival, not only for yourself but for your offspring, so that you can procreate and you can have healthy offspring. And ultimately it would lead to all of this process of this process of bringing change into what you're currently doing. It would lead to you making better decisions, causing better outcomes to happen, and these outcomes would cause other positive outcomes, such as finding a better partner to procreate with, find in order to have your children survive for longer. I need something to blow my nose. Anyway, and so now we can just thinking about this process. Like, say you were a man who is who doesn't really have a role in his tribe. A couple thousand years ago, a few thousand years ago, you would ruminate over this idea that you wouldn't have a role in society, and therefore you would feel really bad about it. And so you would ruminate as to why you feel bad about it. And you would realize that the reason is that you're not productive enough. You aren't doing something that is good enough for the welfare of society. And so that would lead you to taking action to work hard. And obviously, this is a very simplified version, but fundamentally, it translates into the modern world. There are, I'd like to say, 3 steps, more like 3.5, because there's 1, 2, 2.5, and then 3. or rather 1, 2, 3, and 3.5, whatever way that you would like to do it. The first step to finding to overcoming depression is finding out that you are depressed, that you are in a state of pain, and you've if you're watching this and you're watching this with intent, you may have realized that you probably are in a certain kind of pain, or you were, or maybe you are yet to realize it. And one possible reason for that could be that you are simply too distracted with modernity, with your with the daily things that you have to cater to, whether that be endless consumerism, whether that be performance to other people. A lot of us suffer without realizing that we suffer. But then there's a different conversation to have whether suffering without realizing it is actual suffering. But I digress. You must understand. You must find out that you are in pain, and you must not run from it. Do not run from it at all costs. Do not engage in consumerism to fill the void. Do not use Netflix as a fucking coping mechanism. Please don't do that. It's just going to lead to more pain in return. Because अगर तुम रावण का एक सर काटोगे, is it रावण or is it one of those? पता नहीं यार. You cut one head off, two will take its place. You can't keep cutting its head off with fucking Netflix and YouTube and video games. You can't. You have to stop. For me, this was the nights I would have when I'd go, like I said, when I'd be laying in bed listening to Regional at Best by 21 Pilots. Fucking beautiful album if you haven't heard it. Genuinely might be one of the things that saved my life. Kind of an extreme way to put it. But for me, it would be those nights where I'd be laying in bed for an hour, 2 hours, and I'd be crying to myself, and I'd be like, I'm in a lot of pain. And for the longest time, I avoided it. I wouldn't say I ran from it, but I was trying to walk away from it, if that makes sense. I was filling the void of the night with YouTube and falling asleep to it so that my mind didn't drift to the pain that I was in. Take some time off on the weekend. Schedule 90 minutes into your evening on a Saturday. Grab a pen and a notebook. That's all you have. And sit in an empty room. If you don't have an empty room, you can't make an empty room. Sit in your bathroom for 90 minutes. Tell your parents that I'm going to sit there, I'm going to read a book. If you need me, then come back to me after 90 minutes. I'm going to sit there with nothing but an empty notebook and a pen. You're going to write. Doesn't matter what you write. I'd suggest you write about how you're feeling right now. and that would take you closer to the next step. But before I move on to the process of understanding the pain after looking at it, I want you to understand that don't fall in love with your pain. Because if you fall in love with your pain, it leads to a lot of things, a lot of shitty situations, man. For a lot of people have simply gotten into things like self-harm because they saw it get romanticized online. Like, you should be like, genuinely, it is like, I'm not someone to shame someone. Like, I don't like shaming people, but I feel like you should feel ashamed of yourself if you've been romanticizing this idea of depression, this idea of sadness. You've been turning it into a fucking aesthetic. Move on from it. You can't let it absorb you. You have to face it. You have to face it in the eye, look at it in the eye, and tell it that I will overcome you. You will not surrender to it. Because the people who surrender to it are just mediocre. If you think that you'll surrender to it and you will somehow be remembered as someone who's just, oh man, like, I feel so bad for that kid. Like, Bichara Bacha, like, he killed himself. Look at what his parents must be going through. Bro, trust me, in a year, in 6 months, nobody's gonna remember you. Right? Your parents might, your siblings might, but aside from them, there's nobody that's actually going to think about you on a regular basis. The only way to make people think about you, the only way to get actual merit is not by killing yourself. It's not by indulging in these these emo practices, these aesthetics. And I'm not accusing anyone of this. I'm just giving you this frame. I'm just telling you what to do and what not to do. The only way you can leave a mark on the world and make sure it stays is to be alive and create. It is to be alive and to create something that people will remember you for. You want your portrait to be hung up on that wall for decades to come after your death, for centuries even. That's the only way. Understand the metaphysics of the world, that it's not just you there, it's it's a lot of people who are so self-absorbed, and you're self-absorbed as well. So I think the best thing you can do with this level of being self-absorbed, because in truly in the end we can't change it into being external beings, because all that we can experience is coming from within. Next step is to understand your pain. Next step is to sit down and write about your pain. It is to understand where it comes from. It is to talk to people who have been through the pain that you are going through. And if you aren't able to do that, then maybe you'll have to wait for the pain to flare up a little more, because truly the equation of change is change occurs when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of action, of taking action. So once you've reached that point, you can go and understand the pain. You can go and talk to people. You can go and talk to yourself. and you see where this pain is coming from. Like I mentioned, my pain from my family, and in order to solve my pain, to get rid of it, I had to first engage in a very difficult practice. This is the practice that will get you from from the negatives to zero. It will set the foundation for your zero, for you to go high into the positives, to go into the 80s, 90s, and that is gratitude and presence. I cannot explain gratitude and presence to you right now because it would take honestly far too much time. I will I would love to explain it in detail if you could just drop a comment, if you could message me at abhakaftw on Instagram. I would love that so much. And I will love to explain to you in detail what gratitude and presence did for me. In short, it made me realize that I have a lot to live for. It made me realize the effect that I can have on the world. It made me realize that being able to experience pain and grief and suffering, as well as beauty and joy and fulfillment, was greater than being able to experience nothing, to be stagnant. And of course, you know, pain doesn't have to be all suffering. I'll elaborate on this further, but a lot of times you can choose pain to be either pleasant or suffering. Because, yeah, there definitely is pleasant pain that exists, and I'll explain further later on. So, sit down with your therapist if you can find one and try and understand where this is coming from. Then you must engage in the practice of presence and gratitude, and your therapist will probably not tell you this. Maybe if you live in India, there's a good chance. But if you can, meditate. Once again, meditation is too huge of a term for me to sit here and try and explain all the benefits that come from it. But I can tell you one thing: meditation on its own won't directly solve all the problems you have in life, but meditation will lead to building up characteristics, building up properties within yourself that will eventually indirectly help solve a lot of the problems you have within life. Also, try and avoid metaphysics, because I can assure you right now that you will eventually have the answers. If you can look at the hundreds of thousands of intellectuals, people smarter than you and me, these people have gone through existential crises themselves, and they have come out of them as well. There's a quote by Nietzsche: stare deep into the abyss, and the abyss will stare deep into ye. And what I believe, what I heard come out of Jordan Peterson's mouth on his podcast with Lex Friedman was that if you stare deep enough into the abyss, you will see light at the end of the tunnel. But the thing is that now might not be the time for you to stare too deep into this abyss. It's hard, but once again, presence is what I'd say you can practice. Presence comes from meditation a lot. once again, meditation won't cure your depression, but it will lead to you understanding a lot of things a lot better. And the third step, this will probably work if you're, one second. This will work for those who simply understanding isn't enough, for whom simply understanding your pain won't get you where you want to be mentally. And this is the process of taking action, because there's a lot of people out there who have their own pain, and simply understanding it would really help them a lot. And then after that, they could go out about their lives the same way. They would feel better about it because now they're accepting of it and they're gratuitous of the things that they have. Hmm. Taking action will come from pain. Like I said, I'll say it once again because I cannot emphasize on how important this point is when trying to understand situations you're in, why you're taking action, why you're not taking action. The pain of remaining stagnant must be greater than the pain of taking action. Unless, well, there is no unless, because the way I see it, the pain of discipline only really comes when the pain of indiscipline is truly greater, right? Let me tell you what this was for me. And the third step for me was the longest one. It's the one that led to several years of pain because I wasn't going to the third step. I had gotten to the point of therapy. It felt great. Like in therapy ke baad there was nothing. There was nothing after therapy for 3 years. At least 3 years. Within my family, it led to a lot of conflict. I almost ran away from my house at the start of 2022. I put myself in a situation where my parents did not talk to me. My parents did not look at me in the eyes for 3 months straight. And think about that for a second. How brutal would it be, especially as a child, especially as a 14, 15, 16-year-old, going through the process of seeing caregivers, the people that you look up to, the people that you expect so much from, they don't even look you in the eyes. They don't even seem to care about what you're doing. They just want you to get out of their house as soon as possible. And that was when my pain of stagnancy had become so great that I had to do something about it. Suicide was never a real option for me. I considered it. I got close to it. The closest I got was standing with one leg outside of my balcony. But that's a different story. And ultimately what got me to not take those jumps was my sisters, was the fact that I had to be there for them, that my responsibility was to take care of them. It was my sisters who who made me think that I don't want to go through what they've got, what I don't want them to go through what I've gone through. I don't want them to live in a dysfunctional household. I want to be there for them as the pillar if and when my parents wouldn't be there. Over time, I've realized that my parents were doing a lot of the right things, just in their own negative way, in a way that had led to a lot of pain for me. And it might not even be the case, but at that moment, I was so terrified for them because I loved them so much that I had to be there for them. I didn't give a shit about my parents. I had to be there for them. And so I didn't want to live a life where for what 7 years, 6 or 7 years, I would just I would simply be on neutral terms with my family. I would just be a guest in their house. I'd come in at 9 p.m. I'd leave at 7 a.m. and they'd just see me for breakfast and dinner. I didn't want that. I couldn't have that. Suicide wasn't an option for me. And so I had to take action. And I took action by first going through the pain of empathy, of going through the pain of understanding the other person. Because the likelihood is that if you are in depression, in a state of what seems like depression to you, because of internal family dynamics, whatever they mean, because of people around you, it's probably because they're going through a pain themselves. And that the best thing you can do is to help them go through the pain and they will help you go through yours. God damn. I need a handkerchief. And that solution for me paid off. I understood my parents' negotiables, their non negotiables, and I took an effort to make amends. I took effort to show them love. I took an effort to be gratuitous, not only for them but for my surroundings. And I got through it. It has been 15 and a half months since I realized that I was no longer in that state of depression. That is the longest time I have not been depressed for in probably 6 years. And I'm very grateful for that. And what I've just described to you is my framework of getting through it. At the end of the day, depression is inevitable. you will go through it at some point in your life. Because at some point in your life, you will reach a point where change is necessary. Because we are all dynamic beings, we are never the same. Even the version of me at the start of this video is not the same as I am now. Might be an incremental change, but it is certainly a change. And so you can imagine, you can barely measure the amount of times that you are changing within a day, a week, a month, a year, a decade, your whole life. And yes, at the end of the day, we come from nothing, we end up in nothing. But at the same time, we are everything. We are the earth, the water, the air, the fire. We are the universe. But we are also everything that we will ever experience. So why not make that experience the greatest that you can have? And with that, I'd like to thank you for spending the time listening to this. If you have any inquiries, if you have anything you would like to discuss about this concept of depression, I would love to talk to you one-on-one. I would love to help anyone who is going through their own pain, because I've gone through it myself at some point, and I can take you through all the trials and tribulations of figuring that shit out yourself. And I'll make it easy for you, and I'll make it fast, and I'll try my best to do so. Like and subscribe, do all that cool stuff. I'm a bit sick right now, if you can't tell. And I will see you in the next video.